I mean, not that you aren't good all the time, but I think this is like the best I've heard of this system. I'm so excited. Okay, so I would like to welcome you all to the Cures e-chat for today. My name is James Blessman. I'm one of the faculties, and so you are about to experience a 45-minute Cures. Sweet. So what do I mean by that? Well, CURE stands for the Center for Urban Responses to Environmental Stressors, CURES. And you may say, well, you know, what is that and why is that important? Well, let's think of it like this. If I were to cut you, get a cut on your arm, not if I were to cut you, but let's say you cut yourself, your body will automatically send in platelets to stop the bleeding. It'll send in white cells to prevent infection. It will send in fibroblasts to scar that thing down. And you will not have had to make one decision about what to do. Your body automatically knows how to find its way back to wholeness. You with me? Okay. However, if you were to create what I would say is an error of omission, so your body says something like, hey, stop that. I need some vitamin C down here. They go, well, we don't have any. Well, that's what I'm going to need. Well, I don't know what to tell you. Make do with what you got. I call that an error of omission. So your body's missing something that it's looking for. Or you have an error of commission. Let's say you keep putting your fingers on the side of that wound and you keep spreading it apart. That's your body experiencing something that it doesn't want to experience. So I call that an error of commission. So as long as you don't create an error of omission or an error of commission, your body will find its way back to health. So CURES is a collection of researchers that is primarily concerned with errors of commission. So the things that your body may not necessarily want, that might come by way of air, in terms of what you breathe, or water, what you drink, or in your food, or in the products that you buy. And not only that, those exposures, how we even relate to each other, which is actually my area of interest, is on the issue of social fitness, which is why I wear this hat. Like, I don't wear this hat to be cool. I think I am cool, but that's not why I wear the hat. So it has on the front, which is my purpose, where it says the D gets an A, because I'm trying to have what's called a citizen report card, and the idea is when I accomplish my purpose, 50% of people will be filling out the report card, and they will be getting 8 out of 5 A's on the report card. That's my purpose. I feel it's important to have the purpose in front of you all the time. It helps me to stay focused. So that's kind of why we're in the hat. There's more to that story, but we don't have time for that today. That's not really why we're here. So, but it does highlight the importance of how we relate to each other, because our words and the images that we display have effect on how we ultimately behave. It controls our behavior. And you say, well, why is that important? Well, that's important because we live in a country that has some of the poorest health outcomes in the world. We live in a state that's in the bottom third of all the states of the country. And we also live in a county that's kind of in the bottom of all the counties in Michigan. What that means is that the behaviors and the conditions that are associated with poor outcomes are so common, they become normal. Like, we just accept, you know, oh, my knees are supposed to hurt, my back is supposed to hurt, supposed to have diabetes, supposed to be hypertensive. And that's not really the case. So this is really about making sure that we become aware of the things to which we are exposed so that we can control those honor our design, and reach our full potential. You with me? Okay, good. So today's discussion is around the issue of hearing loss. And, and that becomes very important because that's one way that we communicate. So first, actually, before I get into introducing our first speaker, where's Brian?
Brian just stepped upstairs.
He just stepped upstairs, of course, because he said he wanted to say something. There you go. So maybe we'll have him at the end. But so we do have some other curious folks here. So Graham, you want to raise your hand? Yeah. So is there any other curious people here? You want to raise your hand? Yeah, there we go. So these are all part of the center. So with that, we'll go ahead and we'll get started. So the first up will be Miss Deborah Love, who is from it's the Lyons of Michigan, where they support individuals who have difficulty with both hearing and vision, and other supports as well. And so she's going to have some discussions with us about the social impact of hearing. So, if you would. If we can have a little hand plug. There you go. You want to hold or you want it in here? Okay.
I think it's afternoon now. So I'll say good afternoon. I kind of want to start off with letting you know how I got connected with hearing loss at all. So, 1991, after being told I could have no kids, I had one. Surprise. Thought I had an ulcer, told it was a kid. So, yeah, it was a really interesting ulcer. With that said, I also have a condition that runs in our family. It's a thyroid condition. And my mother has Graves' disease. And pretty much all the females on both my mother and father's side all have a form of it. I actually had to get mine removed a year after my daughter was born. We're not sure if that had anything to do with her being born deaf. She was born with bilateral sensorineural deafness, which is profound. There were a lot of things that come with that. First of all, I was not 21, I was 36 years old. So I had already raised a stepson, and so now I have this little girl who I didn't know until she was a little over 1 year old that she was deaf, because in 1991 there was no infant testing. So today, through our EDI program, infants are tested at birth. It's still up to the parent to follow up if they fail. It happens most of the time. We still have kids who fall through the cracks. My experience was I had to threaten a lawsuit to get my daughter tested, because at 36, I'm an older mother who just wants her daughter to talk too soon. Finally, when we got her tested, and we were told by a group of doctors, after they tweaked all the little things and did what is now called an AVR, that she's profoundly deaf. And I said, okay, so what does that mean? I had no clue what deafness was. The closest I ever came to hearing loss was my 98-year-old grandmother. And at 98, hearing loss is not a big deal considering you live 98 years. So I knew nothing. And the doctor told me something that started me as a parent advocate from that day on. The doctor said, well, she's profoundly deaf. These kids don't learn until they get in high school. There's no need to put her in school. Now, keep in mind, my mother was an educator at the time. She has a bachelor's, master's, PhD in education, worked at DPS. She was an English teacher. She's an attorney now. But she looked at me and said, so you're listening to that? And I said, no, but I need to hear that, because my personality is whatever you tell me I can't do, I'm going to do. And so from that day on, I became a parent advocate, because what I realized is that there's a lot of parents who were told that our kids do not, they can't learn anything until a certain age. And so with that, I started doing a lot of research, finding out the different types of hearing loss, because hearing loss is not everyone is deaf. There's variances. And hearing loss is not a one-size-fit-all situation either. And a couple of my friends are here we're part of the Michigan Coalition, which is a group of organizations that get together to focus on issues for deaf and hard of hearing. And so it's very important, because what we also realize is that a lot of these young people fall through the cracks, and we're not giving them the chances that they have because of the fact that they're deaf. Helen Keller once said, which is how I got involved with the Lyons, because Helen Keller came to the Lyons and said we needed you to be the Knights for the Blind, which Lyons did perfectly. And then she came back a few years later and said that asked us to also be advocates for the deaf and the hard of hearing. She was both blind and deaf. And we do have a lot of people out there who are both blind and deaf. With that said, most organizations, unless they focus on deaf, don't have a real genuine focus on what it is like to be deaf and hard of hearing. Now, I'm not deaf, and I'm not hard of hearing, but I do have a daughter who I've had to take through stages of frustration, fortunately not depression, because we have a lot of depression in the deaf and hard of hearing community, because when you can't communicate, when you can't get a thought across, it does affect you. That does not mean that I've had this unaffected life because my daughter is deaf. There has been frustration, great frustration, because I am not fluent in sign language. There's reasons for that, most of which I kind of kicked myself with, but I had to make choices. But the other is because we learn sign language the way our kids are taught sign language in school. And we do have a problem with that, because I do signed English. It's a whole process. The language is such a very varied situation until, if I'm learning signed English, that is not American Sign Language. Those are two different languages, okay? And for me, signed English was how I got to get my daughter to learn to read. And signed ASL is the conversation form of the language. And that is what most deaf people use. It is also a lot of hard of hearing people use sign language as well. The difference is that obviously if you're hard of hearing, you have some hearing, you can bridge the two languages much easier. But when you're deaf, you don't have that advantage. And since a great amount, about 80% of deaf people, deaf folks, are born to hearing families. So I have two things going on in my house. I have a goddaughter who is trilingual. She's born profoundly deaf, uses no aided assistance. She was born into a deaf family, meaning that more than half of her family is deaf. Her mother, her father, two of her siblings are deaf, two are hearing. So the hearing siblings are fluent in sign language because they're brought up in a primarily deaf situation. The people who are hearing, who are proficient in sign language, or even if they're not proficient in sign language, but they usually have a greater signing ability, those are called CODAs, children of deaf adults. And unfortunately, back in the day, those children were the interpreters for those parents to get them through their banking, through whatever it took. And that takes a toll on a hearing person who has that pressure, especially as a young person. I've known a lot of CODAs, and there's some of them handle it extremely well, and some do not. And so when we look at the effects of hearing loss in our community, we have to also look at the effects it has on those folks in those families who hear, because there's effects all over. There's effects in families like mine, where my daughter is the only one who's deaf. She does have a cochlear implant. She has chosen to be culturally deaf, meaning that her identification is fully within the deaf community, but she uses the cochlear implant for music. She's 28. Do I need to say much more? She knows when to turn it down because she goes on the internet, gets the words so she knows the real words that they're saying, and she turns it down when I come in the house or get in the car. So we do have that agreement on that. But she uses it for the things that she wants to use it for. There's a lot of cultural things when we talk about deaf and hard of hearing, because when she first got the cochlear implant at the age of 7, it was not a decision that her father and I made for her. It was a decision we made with her. And by that I mean, even though she was 7, we told her what possibly could happen and what might not happen, and we didn't know. Do you want to try it? Now, that's an expensive try. $40,000 for the surgery, $6,000 for the outside implant. Insurance was better back then, so we paid nothing. Okay, not true today. I think you have to pay a percentage of it right now. But she does have it. She does use it. She's finding now at 28 years old. That's really hard for me, 28. Okay, I'm going to work with that number. But at 28 years old, she finds a way. She uses it for those things that she needs to use it for. In trying to understand her grandmother, some of the words that she's saying, they have their tools. They write back and forth. There's unique technology now, whereas before, the only way, the original way was the TTY. I think most people are familiar with that. You type on this thing and it went through the Michigan Relay Center, and then the answer came back because the Relay Center would control that situation. The Relay Centers are now closed. We don't have any. What we do have is video phone. So when video phone first came in, it is the TV, and you are talking through a service. I think at that time, Sorensen Video Relay was probably the only one that was available. You call through, an interpreter is looking at the deaf person, and that deaf person is signing to the video phone, to the TV or video service. Then the interpreter on that side is then talking to the person on the other end of the line who is not using sign language. Now, in addition to that, deaf people can talk to each other over the video phone. They don't need the mediator. So I found creative ways to use that to get detailed information to my daughter. And I did that a lot of times because because of the school system here, I was forced to take her out of DPS and send her to Washington, D.C. for high school. It's a college there called Gallaudet University. They have both an elementary and a high school on campus, and so it's residential, and they live there. She was there for 6 years. And there are different things when you look at the environmental effects, that the things that happen for those children here. We're looking at education. That is environmental. We have not understood the process of what they call free and appropriate education when it comes to our deaf and hard of hearing students. And even with the hard of hearing ones, because the assumption is that if you just have hearing loss and you can hear something, you can be easily integrated into the regular education program. And that's not always true either, because it just depends on, number one, the amount of hearing loss. It depends on we're looking at speech when you're talking about someone who's hard of hearing. We're looking at the fact of how other kids relate to those children. And this is one of the reasons why I think in our community we have the group or the community of deaf and hard of hearing who primarily stick to themselves. They're not they don't easily come out into the community being a part of the general community because the acceptance is not always there. We have to look at all of those things when we look at, these are people who at one time back in the day, it was thought there was mental issue and they were put in mental institutions. I don't know if anyone ever heard of the 90-year-old man who at 90, I think it was 90, 92 years old, they realized that he wasn't mentally impaired, he was just deaf. And one of the things that happened very early on when my daughter was younger, I had my own business as well as working a 9-to-5 job and all the other stuff. I had a studio in downtown Detroit, and a friend of mine had an art studio on the first floor. And I went down to her studio one day. I had just moved into the building, went to her studio, and she said, there's this guy out there, every day he comes past and he's just flailing his arms and he's doing all these things. And she said, I think he's crazy. And so I'm looking because I'm thinking, okay, well, it seems like he would come in the building or do something if that was the case. We looked for a long time and I knew very little sign language. But I recognized some of the things he was doing with his hands. And I said, he's not crazy. He's deaf. He's talking to this guy. And this guy is signing back. And I said, he's probably not deaf, but he knows no sign, but so he's not as animated because sign language is very animated. Okay, and people who are really into it, I've watched my daughter sign when she's angry and the signing gets animated. Because that's what sign language is. It's a hand motion, and we have to, the emotion is in the hand more than it is here, because in us, if you're sarcastic, people can detect sarcasm in your voice. But you can't do that if someone is deaf because they're not necessarily voicing. Some of the things, there's a handout that I think most of you may have picked up, and I'm not a person who does handouts and then does this reading everything. I'm assuming everybody in here can read the parts that they need to read. But there are some very good things in here about some of the things you need to know when you're dealing with deaf, when you're dealing with hard of hearing. How many people still use the term hearing impaired? Okay, so that's in the deaf and hard of hearing community. For those who, this is what they've done from birth, this is not an acceptable term. It is hard of hearing for those who are hard of hearing, deaf for those who are deaf. There's also no such thing as a person who is deaf that is automatically a mute. My daughter talks, and sometimes too, it's funny sometimes. When she was little, she sang the alphabet because the way she interpreted it was A, B, C, D, E, F, G. So it's very, and at first I thought, how is she doing that? But keep in mind, there's a lot of deaf people out there who are way back. Beethoven was deaf, okay? He was a composer, okay? Deaf have existed throughout history. It's just that most of the time we don't necessarily know that. So again, deaf and mute are not two things that go together. Another term, and it's more of a Southern term, but I got hit with it one time when my daughter was 2 years old, and 10 years old, and I was thinking about the school in DC, and one of my friend's mother, who at the time was about 65, somewhere in there, she was from the South. And she said, oh, she's going to that school for, so isn't that the school for most of the deaf and dumb? Okay. I also had a person at one of the churches that I went to. He said, I was mentioning that my daughter was deaf, and he said, yeah, I have a brother-in-law who's deaf and dumb. Well, I'm a very sarcastic person, so I bring things home to you when you say stuff. I said, oh, is he dumb? And he looked at me and he said, well, no, he's not dumb, but you just said he was deaf and dumb. Well, he couldn't explain it because we use words just because somebody else said them. Okay, and I think we have to be real cautious about that because what we're doing is we're alienating a population. My daughter tells me all the time, I'm not stupid. I say, yeah, they know you're not stupid, you know, but the thing is that how are people saying things to her to make her think that that's what you think? And so we have to be real cautious about that. What I also have in this handout are a list of organizations, websites, it's near the end, that you might want to go to either for finding out more information. Some of them are information sites. I actually have the coalition site here on this page. Lyons Hearing Center, which is now under the Lyons of Michigan Foundation. They help in getting hearing aids for seniors, for young people, for seniors, it doesn't matter. And this month is Better Hearing Month. So I did not get a chance to put this one flyer out, but St. John's Hospital, in conjunction with Holly Institute, you can get hearing screening at any time during this month, and it's free hearing screenings, but we also do hearing screenings through the Lyons of Michigan Foundation as well. So there is quite a bit, and I don't want to go over all of it, today, but I also gave you a handout with some simple sign language. So if you meet someone who's deaf, by the way, saying hello is just hello, okay? So, and most of it is conceptual, so it's really easy to learn, and it really is. So hopefully you'll take some of this information and share it with people. If you have questions, we have to answer.
We'll wait to the end and allow for questions.
All right, awesome. Thank you very much.
There's a question over there, by the way.
Okay.
Okay, she asked if there was some correlation between the thyroid issue and hearing loss. And yes, there is. It's not confirmed that that's what happened with my daughter because I was also exposed to German measles and I never had the vaccination either. I chose at that time not to get a genetic testing because I wanted to focus on working on doing things with her, and I have recently started the path of doing that just to find out. But yes, thyroid can cause sensory bilateral neural deafness. I did the research, so yes.
Could you please give the name of that college? Could you give the name of the college in Washington, D.C. again, please?
Yes, Gallaudet. It's Gallaudet. Gallaudet University.
And it's for specifically?
The college, you can go there whether you're deaf or not, but it is all the teachers and everything is geared towards deaf, so most of the teachers are deaf. The hearing people who go there are usually going there because they are being trained in sign language, culture studies, or to become interpreters. So that's why they go there. The elementary and junior high school are specifically for deaf and hard of hearing. It's a national school. There is no cost to go to the school, but you are responsible for getting your kid there back and forth. And I have to say the Deltas helped me greatly. And I'm not a Delta.
Just one more to that part. Okay, the Drew Transition School here in Detroit, familiar with Drew Transition?
Are you saying specifically for deaf?
Well, yes, the Drew Transition Center here in Detroit, which is the only adult special needs school, and some of the students there are deaf. So I would like to know, since they can only go to school up until 26, is this a possibility that I can take some information back to the parents there in reference to sending their students there?
Sure.
And also, you said it's free? They
Yes.
just have to make sure?
The school is free. There is no cost. And I used to work at Drew.
Oh, okay.
I was the parent liaison there for 3 years
Oh, okay.
with Miss Kim.
Oh, Kim Merriman.
Yes.
Okay. So what information could I take back for our PTSA?
I can get with you and give you my email address, and I can send you as whatever you need. I mean, I have lots of information about Gallaudet. It's on my computer, of course.
Okay, all right, so I can leave you my email, and then you can email me, and I can forward that to?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciated that. I was educated. I raised my hand on hearing impaired. I was doing that wrong, so I appreciate being educated. And it's really important, you mentioned the issue of kind of the isolation, and when that occurs, you know, we miss out on the blessings of other individuals. So whatever we can do to make sure that we all stay together is clearly good. So thank you. So.